Good afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are. These days, everybody has to say this. Great to see so many people. Great participants list. I had a look at it, very diverse. Think tanks, development professionals, from multiple sectors. Welcome to the third of our 6-event knowledge series on clean air. This one is for clean air for livable cities. My name is Neeta Pokhrel. I'm your moderator for the event, and I work in ADB's South Asia Urban and Water Division. And we have a great session lined up today with 4 speakers and panelists who will talk to us about the lessons learned from the cities, success stories of the cities in clean air. And these are London, Mongolia, Korea, and China. And you know, as a development professional, I am aware that we have poor air quality in Asian cities. But to be honest with you, what I did not know is how bad it was. And I learned that while 50% of us live in cities in Asia, less than 8% breathe clean air, which is air defined by WHO as clean air. So I was really astounded. This is unacceptable. You know, what do we do about it? And this 6-part knowledge series is exactly that, to share lessons learned from each other, especially the cities that have treaded before us in how they did it. What were the interventions? What were the policy actions? Who were the actors? So the 4 panelists will share their sessions today. The way we will conduct this is we will introduce the panelists. I will introduce them just before the sessions. And we invite welcome remarks short from Sujata Gupta very shortly. And after 2 presenters, we'll have a short Q&A session. Then we will continue with the next 2 presenters, followed by another Q&A session. Then we will bring all the panelists together for a deeper discussions into the lessons learned. And then another round of Q&A, and followed by wrapping up with recommendations from the panelists. One great news of these series, all 6 of them, is we are collating recommendations from professionals like yourselves and the panelists. And later on, we will use these as brainstorming session and think tank and recommendations to go forward in shaping our own interventions with the cities in Asia. So without further ado, I would like to invite Sujata Gupta, who is Director of our Sustainable Infrastructure Division in East Asia Department of ADB. She joined ADB in 2003 and has worked on public-private sectors in ADB in many senior roles. And before joining us, she worked as a senior fellow and director in TERI in India. So over to you, Sujata. Thank you very much for joining us. There is a fair bit of echo. Maybe I will request everybody to switch off their mics. Whoever's not speaking, please. So only the person
Thank you,
who has a mic
Neeta.
on. Thank
Am
you.
I audible?
Yes, you are, Sujata.
Okay. Thank you, Neeta. And a very warm welcome to all the participants. And I think we are spread all over the globe thanks to COVID. So good evening to those in Manila and around. Good afternoon and morning to some of our participants who are on the other side of the globe. We are all aware that we are facing enormous environmental issues, air, water. These are set to accompany development. But to my mind, such development is incomplete. So you cannot have development with high levels of pollution, and clearly such development is not sustainable. And what's worse, for many of our countries, many cities and countries are yet to develop, and they're already in the grip of acute air quality issues. And this problem is particularly remarkable in Asia, which has large population living in densely populated and polluted urban areas. So I think this series of webinars or seminars organized by ADB are really, really relevant, and they address the key stages of the problem. One, understanding it. Two, looking at solutions. Three, developing strategies. And finally, achieving clean urban development. Now, in this, an excellent and recent example is of the People's Republic of China. ADB has been engaged with the PRC in improving air quality in the greater Beijing-Tianjin-Hebei region. In short, it's called BTH. And when I say greater, it's looking at not only Beijing-Tianjin-Hebei, but also the surrounding provinces. And we've been working there since 2015 to 2020. And ADB has used a range of different modalities to make a catalytic impact. So that's where ADB's contribution may be very small compared to the size of the investment that was required to clean up the air in Beijing, for example. But we feel that ADB used a range of different types of loans, right from policy-based loans to financial intermediation to project-based loans to results-based lending to achieve a significant and very marked improvement in air quality in Beijing and the surrounding areas. So we do have on the panel somebody sharing that experience who has worked with ADB. And of course, no event these days is complete without mentioning the dreaded pandemic, COVID. However, let us see the positive side of things. Let us see the silver lining in the clouds. This pandemic has impacted economic activity, but is also giving us an opportunity to rebuild. And as we rebuild, let's build back better. And we can do this based on the experience and knowledge acquired by others. And this is where this particular webinar is very important, because it would inform us of what the others did to achieve what most of us are trying to achieve in other places. So knowledge sharing is one of ADB's key agenda under our strategy 2030. And through this webinar, we will share ADB's and examples from other cities like UB, Ulaanbaatar and Incheon that can be replicated in other cities, especially in Asia. And the webinar takes us a step further to implementing the Clean Air program by learning from what others have achieved. And we have an eminent panel to share their knowledge, and we look forward to learning from their knowledge and experience. So thank you, Neeta. Back to you.
Thank you, Sujata. Really appreciate that. Now, as our first panelist, we invite Stephen Inch to talk about air pollution story of London. How wonderful it is to go historically back, and the most famous story is the first. So Stephen Inch has worked in air quality for 14 years. He currently works as Senior Policy and Program Officer, Air Quality for Greater London Authority. He has worked for Greater London Authority for, as I said, many years, 14 years. And his work has included in reducing emissions from construction to machinery to challenging the expansion of Heathrow Airport, creating planning policy to protect air pollution, and most recently working towards the delivery of ultra low emission zone in 2021. Over to you, Stephen. Just a request that you have 8 minutes to finish your presentation. We'll have lots of Q&A time for all the panelists later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start straight into my presentation because, as always with London, there's a lot to say. And it's very difficult to know where to start with London. I think we've seen issues of air pollution back to as early as 1600 or the 1650s. But I thought it'd be interesting to start really with the Great Smog from the middle of the 20th century. And historically, I think London has always grown, but during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, we saw a huge process of industrialization and a rapid growth in population, most of which was based around coal as a fuel for the industry, for power, and to heat homes. And in particular, the coal used in the UK at the time was very high in sulfur. And this, combined with the growing use of cars as a mode of transport during the 20th century, by the mid-century, sort of by 1952, we got to the situation where the smogs were so bad that over 4,000 people died in the aftermath of the winter smog of 1952. And shockingly, I guess, by today's standards, it took that many very clearly correlated deaths to actually trigger some form of action. I just want to draw people's attention to the lower picture here. This is Bankside Power Station, and although we were moving to electricity at that time, a lot of the electricity was generated by coal in the cities. So what happened in 1956 was the passing of the first Clean Air Act. And that actually used a number of ideas that are common in anti-pollution legislation today. The first thing was it looked at a zonal approach. So it gave people the chance to say, well, where is pollution worst? That's where we want to intervene. And then within those zones, there were specific controls, and they actually sought to control both the machinery, so both the types of fireplaces, the types of big furnaces and power stations, but also what fuels were used. So we moved to much lower sulfur coals. This was enforced at a local level, so people literally able to come around and knock on your door and say, there's smoke coming out of your chimney, what are you doing? And they could impose financial penalties or even imprison people if they really didn't behave themselves. But balancing this, there was provision within the Clean Air Act to fund replacement technology, and the replacement technology at the time was gas. And I think the other thing that's worth understanding about the Clean Air Act is it didn't create the idea of using gas to heat homes and to power our industries. This was something that was already happening, but what the Clean Air Act did was it rapidly accelerated that process. It also really pushed hard against big industry, and this the picture here is the same power station that was in the earlier slide. This was taken a couple of years ago, and it's now a very famous art gallery called the Tate Modern. It's the big gallery of modern art in London. No longer produces power. Well worth a visit if you're there, but it's a good contrast as well. So what did the Clean Air Act achieve? And I think, as I said, it was very high sulfur coal. So you can see really a good measure was how the sulfur dioxide levels in London disappeared quite rapidly over time. And you see an initial rapid drop and then a continued tail off, and sulfur dioxide concentrations remain low now more than 60 years later. This slide's a little bit old. However, I think what we did see was that while sulfur dioxide and smoke levels and the Great Smogs all started to die away, that didn't solve all of our air quality problems. And this graph at the bottom shows nitrogen dioxide levels in London between 2000 and 2017, and you can see it's a relatively flat curve that actually we weren't seeing similar reductions in those pollutants. So a little bit about how we're working today. Today our principal pollutants of concern are no longer sulfur dioxide, as I said, they're nitrogen dioxide and PM2.5. Our dominant source is no longer industry and homes, it's traffic, although actually home heating from gas is becoming a more dominant source as we start to succeed with reducing nitrogen dioxide from traffic. interestingly, it's often the people living in the poorest areas, even in a city like London, who are seeing the worst impacts of air pollution. The other thing to note on this is the map on the right-hand side is London's air pollution 2016, and you can see this sort of concentric pattern that it's very much concentrated in the middle. Well, that's not to say the air's wonderful on the outskirts of London, but this pattern is important to notice for the next slide. So the big intervention we're making at the moment is this ultra low emission zone. It's targeted at road transport, and it's targeted initially starting at the most affected zones and then expanding over time. And as you'll see on the map showing the zones for the ultra low emission zone, those zones very much match where we have the worst pollution. And then we've carried over some of the thinking from the Clean Air Act. So we have this zonal approach, we have penalties for breaching the rules, but also we've created scrappage funds to help people who are struggling most. So poor single traders, small businesses, charities, people who are really struggling to replace their vehicles and who are performing important services. But yeah, so there's a carrot and a stick element to this policy. We've also invested huge amounts of money in improving our sustainable transport provision, not just increasing the amount of transport, but cleaning up the buses and the taxis that we use to provide that transport. So the first phase of the ULEZ started in central London. That was the yellow zone on the previous map in April 2019. And this slide is taken from 6 months on. The important line on this slide is the red one, and this is roadside nitrogen dioxide in central London, so within the ULEZ zone. And the green line is what would have happened, we think would have happened without the ULEZ, and the red line is what happens with the ULEZ, and you see a very rapid drop-off. And by contrast, outside of the zone, although there is a bit of an improvement, it's not as rapid or as steep. And we think that NOx emissions are now 31% lower than if the scheme was not in place. So that sort of, I suppose the idea of that was to give you a feel for what the Clean Air Act did and how we're taking some of those ideas into the current day. But it's not everything we're doing. The ULEZ isn't the end of the story. I think we've obviously want to build on these historical successes. We want to go beyond the legal limits that we have to meet to actually try and achieve the Mayor's goal of the cleanest air of any world city, which is a big goal. And on the right-hand side here is a list of all the areas of pollution that we're looking at to try and, you know, once we have the ULEZ working, these other sources become more important, like buildings and construction machinery and so forth. We're also increasingly working in a cross-disciplinary way with our colleagues working on climate change and looking for solutions that serve both improving air quality and reducing our climate change emissions. And that hopefully was around about 8 minutes. Oh, Nita, I think you're still on mute.
It's still on mute, Nita.
It should be.
You're good. You're good.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Thank you, Stephen. You were great in keeping time. Then I've eaten up a few minutes already with my technical glitch. Just a reminder to audience, if you have questions for Stephen, please put them in the chat box. And after the next speaker, we will come back to the question round. So our next speaker is Alex Hykens. He's the representative of UNICEF in Mongolia. Alex joined UNICEF in 2013 as a senior advisor at UNICEF headquarters, New York. He has led development, implementation of UNICEF's policy on climate change, energy, environmental sustainability, and many other areas. And prior to UNICEF, he worked as regional policy advisor for UNDP program in Asia Pacific. So with that, Alex, may I please invite you to give your presentations? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, everybody. Very glad to be in the call today. And let me see if I get everything nicely on the screen. Let me start with our focus as UNICEF. The reason why UNICEF got involved is really because we look at it from a maternal and child health perspective. We really have here in Mongolia a serious challenge. It's a maternal and child health crisis, I would say. For example, very simple statistic, in the winter, we have stillbirths increased with about 350%. I think that says it all. The exposure to PM 2.5 levels here in Ulaanbaatar is so extreme that a very large number of women lose their unborn child during the winter. Now, as UNICEF, we work on basically on three components. The first component is around evidence and capacity building. The second one is around action on the ground in terms of strengthening health services for affected populations, reducing exposure to pollution. So think about improving indoor air quality in kindergartens and hospitals. And we also work on actually reducing air pollution in terms of actions. And then the third component, no surprise, is of course the policy advocacy work that we do. And of course, there are many other actors in Mongolia actively involved, including ADB, a very key player here in the field. Now, when we started to look at the situation a couple of years ago, what could UNICEF contribute and what is the problem? I mean, here in Ulaanbaatar, I mean, it sounds like we're in the 50s in London in many different ways. The pollution levels during the winter are extremely high, well over a factor of 10 above the WHO guideline of 25 microgram per cubic meter as a daily average. But frequently in the nighttime and also sometimes in the morning, we in different locations, we exceed more than 1,000 microgram per cubic meter of PM 2.5. Much of that pollution is coming from burning coal in the residential areas. And that is a combination of people burning coal in their kind of simple brick and mortar homes, but also in the traditional gurs. You see one picture here, just below Ulaanbaatar, the word Ulaanbaatar, you see a traditional Mongolian gur, in many countries known also as a yurt. We realized that the problem is, however, not only in Ulaanbaatar, and that is where most development partners and also governments were focusing on, but we realized the problem in the provincial centers is also really significant. And we realized that if, as UNICEF, we want to make a difference, perhaps we should start actually with focusing on one of these provincial centers, because it's much smaller scale, it's more clearly defined, and almost nothing has happened yet in those places. And I guess the timing was good that we had that conversation internally, because one of the governors from these provinces approached us and asked if we could help. This is a picture I took a few years ago in the winter in Bayankhongor, about 600 kilometers to the west of Ulaanbaatar. Very interestingly, at that point in time, there was zero measurement ongoing of air quality. So we really had no clue what we were inhaling, but it was very obvious that it was absolutely horrendous, the situation. This is a small, relatively small town, 40,000 people, but together, because of the climatic conditions, these 40,000 people are generating an incredible amount of pollution, as you can see. So what we agreed with the government and with funding from multiple development partners is to start to take a comprehensive approach, whereby we help them, first of all, with developing a clean air action plan. We started to develop, based on some innovative work we did, to help the traditional homes to switch to electric heating and cooking, combined with really good insulation. We also installed air quality monitoring station. We started retrofitting and renovating a kindergarten for better insulation and also improved air quality. We really worked with the community to raise the awareness and then get people into action. And also, in the meantime, we worked on improving the overall health services in the town so that the amount of damage done to people's health would be minimal as far as possible. So I'll focus in my further discussion on a few of those components that are highlighted here. In terms of air quality monitoring, one of the first things we did was installing an air quality monitoring station, very similar to the approach and the model that the US Embassy has here in Mongolia. A container with the equipment, very robust equipment, and that is EPA reference grade, so that we really get reliable data for the first time from that city throughout the year. We also realized that having one monitoring point only in the city will only give us a very limited view of the situation. So we started to test a number of low-cost devices against the reference station, and this work was led by the Washington University of St. Louis. And based on that very thorough research that they did together with the local counterparts, they identified one of the low-cost devices, the Purple Air, and you see the correlation here on the left-hand side. That was actually doing really well and very consistent in terms of its measurements compared to the reference station. So we've now also deployed 5 of these low-cost devices, like $300 each, in the cities, so that we now really have a first kind of network in the city. We also then, of course, got the first kind of daily profiles throughout the winter, and here you see one picture that shows you the kind of the standard profile here in Bayankhongor, and for comparison in UB the picture is nearly the same as what we have in that smaller town. So you have a big peak in the morning around 8 and 9 o'clock, and then during the afternoon it's actually pretty good, and then in the evening, of course, no surprise, when people start to fire their stoves again, the pollution levels dramatically increase. Now here is an overview of the air quality. This is the first complete data set from this city that we generated. Let's just say green is good, and there is nothing green here on this picture. The whole profile throughout the winter, these are daily averages of PM 2.5. It was basically bad or extremely bad throughout the whole winter. Now, as I said, it's not only talking about problems, but also about solutions, of course. So one of the innovative approaches that we came up with to go together with the Mongolian University of Science and Technology, and also with other key supporters and research institutes, including the University of Pennsylvania, was to really take a fresh look at the traditional Mongolian gur and improve the overall insulation of the gur as a whole, starting with the floor, the walls, the ceiling, the door, everything, and do thorough research with a lot of sensors that were involved the year before already. And based on that, now a very good insulation package has been developed, which then also allows to replace the coal stove with electric heating and electric cooking. And that was piloted last winter with over 200 households. And overall, the results were very positive in many different ways. Even if you don't care about the pollution, what the people often really did care about is that the quality of life has dramatically improved. It's basically now modern access to modern energy services in the traditional gur, which is really appreciated. We also did a lot of work, as I mentioned, with volunteers, especially with youth and children. A lot of energy they have, a lot of ideas, and a lot of outreach, both in person but also through social media, to raise awareness and start really pushing the public in the right direction. But there is still a very long way to go. We need to be clear on that. We just started, as I said, is a little bit like in the 50s in London. So we need to look at where are we now and what needs to be done next. Where we are now, it is clear that it is possible to replace coal-based heating in homes with electric heating. It is also affordable, it's doable, but there is a behavior change component that is very much necessary if you look at it from a consumer perspective. If you look at the supply, there is an issue with power supply. A number of cities don't have sufficient access to electricity to really make that switch from coal-based heating to electric heating. And I think that's where there are also huge opportunities for collaboration with ADB to further expand renewable energy supply together with storage capacity, because you will need a lot of that energy during the night when it goes down to -30, -40 Celsius. And then what is also important for the whole of Mongolia, urban Mongolia, is to really get the data in terms of air quality in these cities across the country. And now we know it can be done in a much more affordable way, combining a reference station with low-cost devices to rapidly and cheaply build a reliable air quality monitoring system across cities and across the country. And then finally, what is really important is that air quality monitoring is combined with health monitoring, because when you talk about people's health, you get more traction than when you only talk about PM 2.5. That is it from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. I'm glad you said that. It's always easier when you say you have asthma, so many people dying of asthma, so many health issues, than PM6, PM5, PM whatever. So thank you very much. We've got lots of great questions for both the speakers. If you want to have a look in the chat box, but I'll read some out to you. First one is for Stephen. Stephen, is the Clean Air Act only passed for London or any other cities of UK? And let me also combine another question there. The initiatives for London, such as these and ultra low emission zone that you mentioned, were great. What pushes the government to take such initiatives on a continuous basis? Just keep responses short, because we have lots of great questions, both of you. Thank you.
Easy answer on the Clean Air Act. It was passed for the whole country, but it allowed each city and each regional sort of government to set their own zones. And what happened was most of the big industrial cities created a zone, most of the rural areas didn't, as you might expect. In terms of the perhaps I've oversold the continuous sort of idea of the initiatives. I think in practice it's actually been quite lumpy. So, you know, a cynic would say in the UK that we did stuff in 1956 and then we've done stuff in the 2010s, and not obviously a huge amount in between. I think health, as Alex said, has always been a huge driver. We've got better evidence of health effects now from things like PM 2.5 and NO2. In the 1950s, it was very obvious what the smog was doing. There's also, up till recently, obviously, as members of the European Union, there's been legal limits imposed by a sort of a supranational entity, which has really helped drive things forward. And the final element actually is a drive up. So the ULEZ, for instance, was created as a London project and as something that's been taken forward by the Mayor of London, but it's now being adopted in some of the other major cities in the UK without sort of initially without a national legislative backing to it. So it's a combination of factors, but those are the main ones.
Great, thank you, Stephen. I will now move between you and Alex, because there's so many questions, if you wouldn't mind. So for Alex, I will just club a few. What is the air quality standard in Mongolia? Is indoor air pollution worse or outdoors? Lots of questions on the low-cost sensors. People are very curious about. There's even a question, how much does it cost? And are they working on light scattering? How long they could be used outside? So maybe these three combined on the sensors, on the quality, indoor is worse or outdoors. These three. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Starting with the devices, the low-cost devices, the Purple Air, the one that is recommended for outdoor use by the Washington University, and Jay Turner is leading this work. It's $300 only, so that's a bargain. But of course, it's really important to have that reference station and to regularly calibrate these devices, because yes, the sensors, they are light scattering sensors, they do get contaminated over time. The good thing about this one, it has two sensors within the same device, and that gives you an early signal in terms of if something is going wrong. What we will do, and I think that can be done the next days, is share a comprehensive report from Washington University about all this work with regard to the low-cost devices. Indoor versus outdoor air quality. Well, in many cases, especially with the housing, we see indoor air quality is outdoor air quality. It is so kind of diffuse, it's hard to distinguish. Only when you have a building with a relatively well-closed building envelope, like our building here in the UN, but also what we've been doing now more and more with kindergartens, measures such as mechanical ventilation with air purification will really help reducing PM2.5. But let's not forget, we also need, of course, oxygen in the building, and we need to get carbon dioxide out of the building, and we need to manage the humidity as well. And with schools, you don't want to have 50 kids in the classroom coughing all over the place and spreading viruses like the flu or, God forbid, anything else. There is no indoor air quality standard yet, but we have advocated for it, and the government is now working on it also with our support.
Thank you, Alex. We have lots more great questions for both of you, but we will come back to them, because let's first cover the other two speakers, and then we have lots of times for Q&A and panel discussions. So now I would like to invite our next speaker, Bee Lee. Bee Lee will be talking to us about air quality improvement in the Greater Beijing, Tianjin, Hubei, shortly known as BTH region of PRC. She is working as business manager with the China National Investment and Guarantee Corporation. She graduated from Tsinghua University, holds a double master's degree from there and the National Paris School of Mines. She's played a great role in the negotiation and establishment of ADB loan on air quality improvement in the region, and has rich working experience in coal to gas to waste to energy and household PV panels. So over to you, Bee Lee. Thank you. Just stick to 8 minutes, please, because we have lots of questions coming all your ways. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Bee Lee from China National Investment and Guarantee Corporation. Today is an honor for me to make a presentation here. Firstly, I'll make an introduction of our company. ING is founded in 1993 by MOF and SETC of PRC. It's the first and the largest guarantee institution in China with a long-term credit rating of 3A. It is also the president institution of China Financing Guarantee Association and a member of the world's top 3 guarantee and credit insurance associations. And now let's start from air situation in China. In 2019, there are 337 cities in China. Among these, 157 of them reached the air quality standards, while other 180 cities exceed the standards. And in 2019, the average good plus days, which means AQI below 100, account for 82%. The 6 air pollutant concentration in 2019 are shown in this figure. Comparing to 2018, the concentration of PM2.5, PM10, SO2, NO2, and CO decreased or remained, while O3 increased. In recent years, air quality has been improving continuously, but China still faces many challenges to improve air quality further. To solve air quality problems, the government has issued a number of policies from national levels to city levels. National level policies like blue sky protection, 3 critical battles, they are usually mid to long terms. national and city levels, like clean heating in North Area and Beijing Clean Air Action Plan. The two regions, BTH region centered on Beijing and Yangtze River Delta centered on Shanghai, are the first and second economic zones in China, and also the areas with highest air pollution. To accelerate reducing air pollution and greenhouse gas emission in Greater BTH region, ING has established a green financial platform. In 2016, the GFP project, Air Quality Improvement in Greater BTH region, ING's green financial platform was approved by ADB and became effective in August 2017. The GFP project used FIL through various financial instruments and applied to mobilize the domestic financing and scale up investment to air quality improvements in the Greater BTH region. This project has a total amount of 485 million euro and a term of 15 years. It can be seen as an innovative way of using foreign capital jointly designed by the government and companies and international financial instruments. The target sector of GFP project include air energy, energy saving and emission reduction, green transportation, and waste to energy. It aims to provide better access to finance for sub-projects located in Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei, Henan, Shandong, Shanxi, Liaoning, and Inner Mongolia. It offers the following financial products, including credit guarantee, debt financing through interest loans, equity, investment, and other credit enhancement methods. The GFP project aims to contribute to air quality improvements, facilitates the concentration of SMEs credit system, and give full play to the leverage effect of ADB loans. Project progress. At the end of 2019, 331.47 million euro has been withdrawn by ING, accounting for 72.37% of the total. The GFP project has provided 2.18 billion RMB to 36 sub-projects and 584 million RMB of guarantee to 2 sub-projects, leveraging more than 5.451 billion RMB of co-financing. In regional distribution, 9 sub-projects are implemented in Beijing, 5 sub-projects are implemented in Hebei, Henan, respectively, 2 in Tianjin, Liaoning, and Inner Mongolia, respectively, and 13 in Shandong. The above sub-project covered all the 4 target sectors. These sub-projects above are expected to reduce consumption of coal by around 725,000 tons per year. Up to now, the GFP project proposed well. It has won ADB's award of the best performing project in 2018 and has been selected as the best practice of nature-based solutions in 2019 UN Climate Action Summit. And here are the pictures. In the past few years, we can see the air quality in Beijing has been improved by our naked eyes. We feel that there is also an effort of the GFP project in it. And that brings to my, brings to the end of my presentation. Thanks for listening. Thanks, Nita.
I'm impressed. Thank you very much. Very well done. And thank you for keeping within time. We also have ADB colleague who is implementing this project, Yun Zhao, with us. And I hear Sujata is also working with you. So our next presenter, last presenter panelist for presentation part is Professor Hee Kwan Lee, who is Professor of Environmental Engineering and Climate Change in Incheon National University of South Korea. He's been working on ambient building air quality control and management, covering basic research, practical solution, and planning. He's also Professor of Climate Change Engineering, working on basic studies as well as greenhouse gas emission inventory analysis, and Director of Energy Institute for International Collaboration and Cooperation in Environment and Climate Change Technologies. So welcome, Professor Lee, over to you. 8 minutes, please.
All right, thank you. Let me just start. So like I say, the topic for me is a little bit different from previous one, because for the moment I just trying to focus on like the Incheon, which is a port city, so that while you're thinking about like air quality management, then I would suggest like trying to think about whether you are covering the whole like the emission sources around yourself. So this might be some kind of clue or some like a tip for the consideration. So so this one is in Korea, we have some like several, not like China, because we have quite several like a port city in Korea. Maybe the Incheon is the one that my university located, and we have like a 3 million population in this city, and also we have like a big. Now the size is getting a little bit different, but one of the major port in my neighboring area. And what happened was in 2007, there has been some serial measurement done by the government and showing that for some reason, the SO2 concentration in Incheon area is higher than the other area, which is Seoul and the neighboring area. And then, that was the beginning of our work, why these things happen. And then later on, there is some other research work showing that at the bottom here, like, although the size of the container ship would be the issue, however, there might be some kind of like impression describing that the PM 2.5 emission is coming out from the container ship would be quite equivalent to the 500,000 trucks on road. So this is kind of like the impression. However, until that moment, we are not quite sure about whether the emission is hidden and unknown. So that's happened like more than 10 years ago in Korea. And so this is what happened, say in reality, really don't know how much fuel being used in a Incheon area, because say the red one is coming out from maybe Manila into Incheon port, so that we really don't know how much fuel being used by the vessel in Incheon area. The same way, when a vessel has a fuel in it from Incheon port, and they'll just like sailing out. So what happened is they say, we really don't know what kind of emission is being made and being produced. So there was some kind of like a technical issue that we have challenged for several years. And on right-hand side, it's kind of like one of the example from our previous study, research work. And then, based on our kind of like a technology, we can collect the activity information, and also trying to, we are able to produce this kind of like the emission mapping to support like air quality management in port area. And then I just gave you some example from Incheon area. However, this issue is not just for Korea; it's over everywhere. So like there is like the global organization name is like International Maritime Organizations, and this is the one actually trying to make some like the commitment to do some like air emission control in the global wise. So the left-hand side is kind of like the kind of emission map of SO2 and global wise. And you can see on this where the Asian region, there will be high like the volume of the ship traffic, which will be producing like the big amount of this the sulfur dioxide emission. For this, the IMO has like enforcing the composition of sulfur in the fuel like by this, so that for the moment 2020, it's every all of the world, all the vessel, they will need to use this were the fuel with less than or the 0.5% of the sulfur dioxide. This is the one. And on the right-hand side, even so, each government, each territory, they can set up this where the emission control area, and then they'll just try to put even stricter like the fuel consumption guideline. So for this, we have been working on this quite for a while, more than 10 years, and then that this work has been like trying to produce like air emission in that area, and then the one of the outcome is like this, the actual emission in Incheon area from the vessel ship is even higher than this. So that for the moment, this is the what's been happening in Korea that you can share. So one is the again, the throughout the last years, like discussion and the governmental, consideration, we have like activated special law on the improvement of the air quality in port area, which is now inactive. And under this word, the regulation, we have 3 different major policy, which is like setting up like the emission control area, and also like the controlling the vessel speed reduction in port area, and also green ship design. These are the kind of like the countermeasures that we are trying to employ to the vessel in a port area. So as the last one, the summary, I think throughout this one, I just would like to give my message in saying that, somehow, although we cannot see the emission coming out from the vessel sailing around, however, we'll need to understand where the emission of the ship is not big, it's not small, it's big. And also we'll need to understand where the impact of the shipping emission into this neighboring area. This is the first one. Second one is these countermeasures to control air emission in the port area. It's pretty much like doable. So that somehow we'll need to, we are willing to share our experience. And then the very last one is actually we have been developing this kind of system for city-wise. So like a monitoring and inventory analysis work and the modeling and some like a scenario. So we are just trying to put these things into one system together so that, the government-wise is going to be okay. However, we know we are going down like a local area, then we'll need to where they have this kind of system even the port city like Incheon. The last one. So you guys are talking about some like the communication and knowledge exchange. So we've been doing this in over 10 years with around like 20-25 Asian countries. So that, later on, I'll try to share the outcome meeting today with the people here. I think this is something from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lee. Very nice presentation. We appreciate that and great messages. We've got a short question. We're running slightly late, but we have good questions. We'll go back to them. I will also encourage panelists, if they are able to see the questions. For instance, Stephen has a lot of questions there still. Alex, if you can, it's easy to type, please go ahead, but I will come back to you also. There was one question for Billy. I also am aware that we have the ADB colleague with us, Yoon Jao. So between Yoon Jao and Billy, if either of you could pick this up, that There are several projects being implemented by government to improve the air quality in the BTH region. Which project or initiative was the most challenging to implement, and how was the challenge addressed? So either Billy, you, or Yun Zhao, if you could answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Nita. I would like to answer this question. I'm Yun Zhou, the Senior Environmental Specialist from ADB. I am also the project officer for ING project, and I've been involved in the processing of a few BTH projects. So to answer the question, the PRC government has taken different initiatives to address air pollution issues, such as phase out small-scale coal-fired power plants and other heavy polluting industries, retrofitting, renovating large-scale enterprises to improve energy efficiency and reduce emissions. The most challenging initiative, one of the most challenging initiatives, was to replace coal with alternative clean fuels in rural areas. As rural people, they have been using coal for winter heating and for cooking for a very long time, which is also relatively cheap. Therefore, some households are reluctant to pay for the clean devices, such as electric or natural gas heaters or boilers to replace coal stoves. What government is doing now is to provide subsidies to rural households or cover the full cost of the new devices for the replacement of coal stoves. Under the BTH program, ADB has supported a few projects which involved assembly and installation of air source heat pumps, greenfield heating furnaces, and wall-mounted natural gas heaters to replace coal stoves in rural areas of the BTH region. The local governments, actually, they purchased the devices, the heaters, from the suppliers and provided to the rural household for free. In 2018, ADB financed a clean cooling and heating project in Shandong province. One of the components is to support the first coal-free county in the PRC, where the local government will provide subsidies to about 80,000 households to switch to clean heating and cooking devices. So this is my answer to the question.
Thank you very much, Yun Zhao. So a quick question, we have lots of other questions and I see panelists are also responding, but before we move on to next, can we hear from you, Billy? Anything to supplement from your side?
Yes. For us, the 36 sub-project we can see in the figure before, there are only 2% is the green transportation. So Ms. Yun has just explained very well. And just make
okay, thank you so much. So Professor Lee, I have, as a moderator, you always get this this privilege. A question for you. We are trying our best also in South Asia, and your point to say data is very important. Unless you have good data and unless you can analyze and have the capacity to do that, you can't quite do the right policy interventions. Now, what is stopping this? There's a lot of talk on big data and using it. What can spearhead this in cross-sharing and using data, and how do we incentivize our cities to invest in it? Does it come with a lot of cost, a lot of manpower? South Korea has abundance of that capacity, which we don't have in some of our other DMCs. What can they do to quickly tackle this?
Basically, you know, compared to other like air quality monitoring and those things, I would say definitely we'll need to design and optimize for certain city, the port area. However, we are basically, this technology is based on like IT, so that, you know, relatively, I would say it won't cost that much, but rather, well, couple of benefit, the big ones. One is the we could be able to understand what are the emission coming out, and we can figure out how we're gonna reduce down those emission, which is like another impact factor to the local eco management. So at the end, I would say still we can have more discussion about it. However, it's not like your project in the UB or your project in the Beijing area. It's not like this.
Thank you, Professor Lee. I think it's a good time to move on to our panel discussion now, though we do have lots of questions, and thanks again to panelists who are responding on the chat box. So if you can, please continue. But first question now back to Stephen, on this issue of air pollution. Stephen, is a great evolving challenge. What London went through in the past, most of our cities are going through now. You have heard of Delhi smoke, Kathmandu smoke. Many of our cities are at that stage that London was in the 50s. So what are some ways for the governments, both national and local, to keep up with these evolving challenges? If you could briefly answer, please.
Yes, I think I'd say there's maybe three parts to this answer. I think the first one is things like this event, and actually looking for examples from other people who've either been through the same thing in the past or are going through similar kinds of problems now, and trying to learn from each other. And in particular, I always emphasize we should try and learn from each other's mistakes. Obviously, all governments everywhere don't like to admit to the things they've got wrong in the past, whatever type of government they are, but you can see in there's usually something that people have got wrong in the past. I think the lesson that we're trying to learn at the moment as a city is actually to think about what's the long-term goal. So obviously the immediate goal is to make air pollution better, to get rid of the worst sources. But actually, if we find it very helpful to also think about, well, where do we want to be in 30, 40, 50 years' time? An example of that is we had a lot of pressure at one point to try and move our taxis from diesel to LPG, which would have involved huge investment in refueling infrastructure and so forth, that would have then, but actually where we want to be is electric vehicles. So installing all of that LPG infrastructure would be very expensive and redundant, and create a pressure to continue to use it. So it didn't fit with our long-term trajectory. I think the other thing I would say is actually think about, in that long-term view, is to think about what you can use as pressure as a big customer. Cities are big organizations, countries are big organizations, to actually drive the solutions you want to see. And again, a good example from us is we set a target for our taxis to become hybrid or electric in order to be given a license, and no such vehicles existed when we set that target, and that's actually created an industry in outside of London but within the UK, building those new taxis, because we signalled quite long in advance that that's where we wanted to go, and then engaged with manufacturers and car companies and stuff to say we need this product so we can do that, and obviously we had enough power to drive make it known there would be a market. I could say a lot more things, but I think those are the key items.
Let's come back to it. Thank you, Stephen. No, they were great and clear recommendations. Next one is to Alex. And actually, I see one of the questions on the chat box, which just rightly fits, good timing for this question also. So you covered really well on the social and health space. Certain things are being done, air pollution, tackling it with the pollution side, versus what can be done more and is done effectively in the social and health space to reduce impact on air pollution and on people and their health, and children in particular. And in the chat box, actually leading on to it, if you could also refer to this question that I see Virinder has raised, that that it is more about, I've just lost this question now. But yeah, I think
yeah,
you would.
I remember the question, don't worry.
Yes, thank you. On the vulnerable side, so please, thank you.
Yes, indeed. So let me start with the health component, because I think it is something, to be frank, that has been overlooked in many countries. Very much everybody focusing on reducing pollution only, which is of course the only long-term solution. But in the meanwhile, forgetting about what can we do in the short term to reduce exposure and minimize harm. For example, one of the things which was very clear was that the health sector really had not much of an idea of what air pollution was doing to health and what they could communicate as health professionals, for example, to pregnant women. So there is a very kind of major learning that needs to be done within the health sector. And last year, together actually with ADB and with the government, we organized an international conference specifically on this subject. So what we can do afterwards is share the resources that came out of that conference so that colleagues get a good overview on that. The second question around vulnerable communities. For us, it's very much the priority, and maybe I did not highlight that enough in my presentation. Why is it a priority? Because if you look at where the most vulnerable live, it is in the most polluted areas. Yes. So their housing is very problematic from an air pollution perspective. It is them who burn the raw coal or refined coal. It's not me sitting in my nice apartment in the southern part with the lowest levels of air pollution. Also, the impacts are more severe because, for example, their diet is often of poorer quality, which, for example, means less vitamins, less antioxidants, which all makes them more vulnerable in combination with air pollution to, for example, flu and pneumonia. And then they don't have the financial means to get out of it. So yes, we definitely focus very much on it. And it is that combination of where you have the pollution and the most vulnerable, it's often coming together, unfortunately.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, we are also reading the areas with more air pollution is more prone to getting COVID-19 and getting seriously sick. And so it's all linked. Now we move on to Billy. So Billy, again, it's air pollution is not just cities, the civil servants problem, it's cross-cutting issues, and everybody must chip in. So in your experience with projects in the BTH region, can you explain the dynamics and coordination that you think is required with national government, city government, private sector, financial institutions, research institutions, and citizens?
For the national government, they usually have overall and the top policies and plans for various indicators, and the detailed policies usually separated and be issued by the local city governments. And the government at each level have their budget for the environmental protection. And for research institutions, they usually analyze the cause of air pollution and help to give the policy making and project implementation. And for private sectors, they are usually involved in many fields, and they have the first-hand information on both the market and the technology. And for institutions like us, we usually support the project to move forward. Normally, this kind of project, they has a very long term and may not have that high financial return compared to others project on the market. So that's our we play this kind of role to promote the project. And for individual citizens, it's mainly to improve their awareness by changing their way of their daily lives, like to promote the electric vehicles and the garbage clarification.
Thank you, Billy. Actually, if I may, I know I'm putting Sujata on the spot here. Sujata's division is doing lots of innovative work in ADB in terms of bringing multi-sectoral projects on the platform, incentivizing all these different players. Sujata, would you like to quickly add something to this on what can be done better? I mean, we in other regions look to your division on what's being done. Anything to add here?
Yeah, thanks, Nita. I'm not going to switch on my video. I'm having internet issues.
No problem.
But I think what is a big lesson learned from our BTH initiative with ING is the fact that we have been able to leverage local domestic financial resources and develop local capacity. So that's why our intervention has been catalytic in that sense. And we have leveraged 3 times the resource that ADB put in. So, and this was coming in from commercial sources. And as Billy explained in her presentation, we were targeting small and medium enterprises, which normally have a problem in accessing financial resources.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the greatest achievements, if I may say so, of this project, the leveraging impact and helping small and medium enterprises.
Thank you, Sujata. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Yes, we don't see much of this resource mobilization in other regions, so we look forward to learning more. Now, a question to Professor Lee. Again, same thread, shortage of funds and technical capacity to collect data and carry out the processing and modeling. And as you said, these are required for better policy interventions and actions. So are there any regional and global air quality data platforms that governments could refer to for developing air quality management plans? A lot of our clients in South Asia and Southeast Asia are embarking on these air quality management plans, the long term. So what can they use? Some tips for them, please.
In global wise, we know that there is one like managed by the U.S. government, and also definitely like the EU Union, European Union they have some like a good system for their member countries. However, in Asian region, unfortunately, we have got some like the association running their small bit. But as I am aware, we don't have such kind of system that the researchers or any government could use it. So I think that might be kind of like a good beginning for the ADB to initiate this kind of like designing and build this kind of platform for the Asian countries. It's a very good idea for you.
Yeah, thank you. I think we need to continue discussing. For all the panelists and colleagues, I'll go back to some of the questions. For participants, if you have more questions, please type them in the chat box. We have allocated another 10-15 minutes to 10 minutes, I should say, not 15, because we use some of it, to get questions from you. Then we will go back to the panelists for the recommendations. So one question for Steve. I think you've answered most of it, but again, I'm just seeing, was there anything unanswered in the chat box that we have not picked? And Alex, there was one also on government providing subsidies to replace coal-based heating with electric heating in the GARE areas. So maybe I will ask Alex to answer that while I'm looking, because I see Alex and Steve have already answered a fair bit. Alex, would you like to take that on?
Sure, let me start with the subsidies. Yeah, the package that we developed in terms of electric heating, cooking and insulation has now been adopted or recognized by the government under its 8% green loan program. So that is indeed now part of that subsidy program for green technology, which is definitely going to help us to get this more and more, not donor-driven, if you wish, but really it needs to become a more commercial and sustainably financial product and approach, and that's what we are working towards to. Also working with the commercial banks, that's also what we started right now. Then on top of that, and I have mixed feelings about it, the government is heavily subsidizing electricity. In Ulaanbaatar, the night tariff is 100% subsidized. And now they also just decided, I think 1 or 2 weeks ago, that in the provincial centers, the electricity will also be 100% subsidized. And in the smaller places, it is subsidized with 50%. I'm not a fan of 100% subsidy because I do not see how that is financially sustainable in terms of the supply. What we actually developed, the model, the approach, it actually was tested in the city. At that time, it only had 50% electricity subsidy, and still it was affordable. It was the same amount that people were paying for coal-based heating compared to electric heating. So in that sense, you don't need the 100% electricity subsidy, but I will admit it's definitely going to help us in the short term. But I don't know if it may kind of bite us back later on in the longer term. So we'll need to see how that goes, but that is the current situation.
I'm with you. We have great debates on subsidy in all sectors and the pros and cons of it. There's one more question for you, Alex, while you're there on the Youth Clean Air Network. If you can mention briefly more about it so other cities in Asia can replicate similar programs. Mm-hmm. The Clean Air Network for youth. Yeah, Youth for Clean Air Network. Yeah.
Yes, so we have started recently, or actually for many years, we've been working with the Scouts Association. And together with them, this is part of a new initiative that we started last year to really work with the Scouts to mobilize youth in cities, in towns, to get them actively involved. For example, also in terms of monitoring air quality, using low-cost devices, raise awareness, be very active on social media about it, and it's definitely helping to push the envelope. Let's put it like this: at some point, one of the ministers came to me and said, well, Alex, your youth is very active on social media, complaining about the pollution levels. I was like, yeah, they are measuring, they're reporting, it's your constituents. But I think definitely that's a good way to go about it. And I will be very happy to share more details afterwards.
Great. Thank you, Alex. I think other panelists have kindly answered quite a bit. Just very briefly, if I can also invite my colleague Virinder here. He works with our UCCRTF fund, which is Urban Climate Change Resilience Trust Fund, and they are doing a fair bit of work supporting cities for in air quality monitoring as well as management plans. Very briefly, 1-2 minutes, please, Virinder. Thank you. So you also get a taste of what's happening in ADB besides East Asia division.
Okay, thank you very much, Nita. I think a very exciting seminar and a good collection. I think my comment already there, what I've felt is that, a lot of it is focused on the supply side, which is policy, regulation, technology, monitoring, finance, and fuels. I think what I like about the presentation from Mongolia, and Alex has already mentioned that, is this whole issue about democratizing air pollution data. And what we have succeeded in Kolkata is almost, school sensors and street sensors, about 100 sensors, actually providing that information and empowering people and citizens to actually know what exactly this air quality parameters are and what actions need to be taken. And like, Alex, the TA that we are supporting currently now is actually working in 5 secondary cities And that's where I think the changes are happening in terms of ensuring that, you know, we don't get fixated into the policy, regulation, finance and all, because cities and governments are struggling where to and a lot of them are actually spending a lot of money on these high cost sensors and all. Our sensors in Calcutta are actually less than even 300, you know. That's the benchmark.
They are very cheap, yeah.
Yeah, and you know this. So I think this whole idea about empowering citizens, because they're already suffering, given the location, the shelter, the fuels that they use. If you don't address air quality from a vulnerability perspective, then you get lost in technology. I've seen many seminars just discussing types of sensors and benchmarking and all that. So I just wanted to bring this issue to perspective. Yeah. I hope.
Thank you, Virinder. No, it's great. Because yeah, again, this was my project in my division where we did the first city level flood forecasting and combined with air quality monitoring. And again, it gives the sense of, you know, on your mobile phones, you can see the quality, and you as Alex said, then you can go up in arms with the city to say, what are you doing here? And you need to give those tools. Moving on, I would like to again go back and invite all the panelists to give their recommendations. I think there is one more question for Steve. So maybe we start with Steve again for your answering this question, and then any more recommendations that you can give so we can collate. As you know, for all our six-part series events on air quality improvement, we will be collating all of the experts' recommendations, your questions, and taking it forward in the way we will plan our interventions and work with the government. So this question is in cities, winter coming up in cities like Kathmandu, Ulaanbaatar, Lahore. They will start facing problems of smoke. What quick actions or low-hanging fruits? Perfect. Now you can give your 3 recommendations of low-hanging fruits. Over to you, please, Steve.
Oh gosh, I struggle with this one because I'm not sure that there are low-hanging fruits, and I think that's, you know, a realistic view to take forward, and it's quite important to communicate to people that, you know, we want to change air quality, but it might take. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It might take 5 years. It might take 10 years. But, you know, we can see incremental improvements. And to go back to something Virinder said about monitoring, I think a really key factor of monitoring is to show people that what you're doing is working. You know, and that's why we have, you know, I had that lovely graph from the ULEZ and from the Clean Air Act. But I mean, even with the Clean Air Act, you can see that it wasn't until we were into the 60s that you start on that really deep slope. And one depressing thought for everyone here, in terms of burning solid fuels, you know, we make a great show in London that we got solid fuels more or less out of the city in the 1950s and 1960s. And what's happened in the last 5 years is a fashion for a nice cozy wood fire in the winter. And people are reopening fireplaces that were sealed up 30, 40, 50 years ago. And we're actually starting to see new problems re-emerging with PM 2.5 in the winter. I wish I could have given a happier answer.
That's okay, perfect. You gave your recommendations earlier. We've recorded that. So I will now ask Alex, same question. Any recommendations, 3 recommendations besides the one you've made? Great point about you know, social health and empowerment. So anything else to add to the bucket, Alex?
Yes, don't go for the silver bullet solution because they don't exist. And I have to be very frank with an example from Ulaanbaatar. In Ulaanbaatar, they have switched from raw coal to refined coal. And yes, it seems that reduced PM 2.5 levels quite significantly, with 30 to 40% perhaps. But if you go from 10 times above the WHO guideline to 8 times above the WHO guideline, you are still in deep, deep trouble. And continuing to promote refined coal is not going to get you even close to where you need to be. And on top of that, it has created a new problem because the idea was not thoroughly thought through. Last winter, we had an enormous increase in carbon monoxide poisoning cases. And it is very clear, it is because of the refined coal. It's the wrong fuel for the wrong type of stove that people are using. So we had more than 2,500 reported cases. We had more than 30 fatalities. Half of them were children. And in the bottom line is we replaced one problem with a new problem, and still the old problem is looming over us. That's one recommendation. Do not go for the silver bullet solution. The second recommendation is related to winter preparedness. We need to take that comprehensive approach, because if we get an outbreak of the flu like we had last year in Mongolia, the hospitals will again be completely overwhelmed with flu, with pneumonia, many children, many times coming back to the hospital. If on top of that we would get an outbreak of COVID, the country would be woefully unable to deal with the situation. So again, the importance of working across sectors, air pollution, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Energy, all of it, it needs to come together. And winter preparedness needs to look at these different, needs to look through these different lenses at the winter to be ready for it. And on top of that, we will have many more people in poverty than before, which means they will likely rely on even worse types of fuels than they did last winter.
Thank you, Alex. I would like to again now invite Billy. What about your 3 recommendations? Don't be pressured to make it 3. If it's 1 or 2, that's also good, because we've covered a lot.
Yes, for my personal view, I think the policies and initiatives making need combine with the city's own situation. And the amenities need to be taken into consideration, like the energy structure and the economic development situation, and also the regional and the geographic conditions. And I think another is to learn and get knowledge of the advanced international standards. Like we learn a lot from the ADB project. And the third is, I think it's a whole effort. Is all the parties get together. Like government, they issue policies, they give the subsidies, and like financial institution, we provide a lower interest rate, and for citizens, they have a more
public awareness.
Yes, the public awareness to be improved. Yes.
Great, thank you, Billy. Now, Professor Lee, what about your final 3 recommendations?
I may have 2.
Perfect.
So that again, when the idea about like urban air quality management, proposed by the ADB is very, how can I say, very good timing. And because I'm because I've been working on air pollution issues like since the university life. And then when you are talking about like a nationwide, government-wide, they're kind of okay because they have a good pool of the expert and research working on it. However, when we go down the small like city-wise, which is we are really living in there, and then they're getting some kind of trouble with the lack of experience, lack of the capacity to deal with. So that I propose some small like idea about the cost, which is mainly for the city-wide air management support system, something like. So that might be some kind of like a way, because we already have got some good deal of experience already. So it's just time for integrating our experience into make small ones for like a practical use application in local side. It's the main one. And the additional one is, again, when we are talking about air pollution issue, we will need to keep trying to find out some unknown source. So like the shipping emission is one of the example. So that, because basically when you're talking about air pollution source, we are just looking at our existing emission inventory. So then, we also always keep looking what any other source around that we have missing while we are trying to make like improvement for the air quality issue. I think these are the major two things that I would like to suggest.
Great. Thank you, Professor Lee, and thank you all the panelists for your wonderful presentation summaries. I now have this in my list, a very interesting and tough task of summarizing, which is impossible. We've had a great session, but just few things, if I may say, which I really liked, was there are no low-hanging fruits. If there were, squirrels ate them. Heidi wrote that on the chat box. I don't know if you saw it. There are no low-hanging fruits, and she writes, if there were, squirrels ate them. And another one that stuck with me, don't go for the silver bullets, they don't work. The community engagement, empowering people with data and giving access to that is again something that stuck with me for an urban development professionals. Vulnerables, make it the other side, demand-driven side. Multi-sectoral efforts, governments can't do everything. You need to have others, mobilizing local resources, incentivizing for that, and also you know, in terms of going forward, how ADB can do more. So thank you for a really great session and great questions from the audience also. Before I go, I would like to introduce you to the chief architect of this session, who really did a lot of work behind the scenes to make this so interesting. And her name is Karma. Karma, please put your video on. And she's also the chief architect trying to drive this entire clean air initiative in ADB and making all of us urban development specialists and environment specialists come and talk to each other and cross-share knowledge and push it forward. So last word should be from Karma. Karma, come over, please.
Yes, I'm here, Nita.
Okay, something from you?
Well, I just want to thank you and the panelists and the audience. I think this was, as expected, a very lively and rich discussion, and a lot of material going forward, you know, for us to work on. As we had earlier mentioned, that we are really looking for recommendations and looking for converting these recommendations into actual projects and actions.
What about the next session, Karma? Can you tell everybody about the next one in the series?
Yes, so the next session will be, we are looking at the co-benefits between climate change, air pollution, and the other sustainable development goals. This will be held next week on 8th October. So we will be sharing the event flyer and invitation and the registration link within this week, so very soon. So we would also like to invite all the participants here to please join the other webinar as well. And there we will be looking more into how to package projects to source climate funds. Because right now, you know, climate change is the most important thing, and there are a lot of funds around that. So how to package air quality projects together with, you know, the climate change objective.
Thank you, Karma. So with this, we have only exceeded the time by 2 minutes, which I don't think it's too bad. And we thank you all again. Please join us in the next session, and please keep giving us your recommendations, solutions. We can't have 8% of Asian population breathing clean air. We need to increase it rapidly. So thank you. Good night, good afternoon, good morning, everyone.
Thank you, Nita.
Thank you. Bye.